everybody? Welcome to Starting Lineup for Week 14 of the MLS season here with our resident fantasy expert, Andrew Wiebe. I'm Nick Firchau filling in for Jason Seguini. And Andrew, let's get right down to it. First and foremost, some injuries for some prominent players, including guys like Matt Hedges, Aurelien Collin, and Dominic Oduro. Give us the latest on what the fantasy players should do.
Yeah, there's 5 guys this week. Guys that really push a lot of fantasy teams in these leagues. We'll start with Aurelien Collin in Kansas City. Of course, Matt Besler not there with the U.S. national team. There had been some concern about his health, but he played 90 minutes in the U.S. Open Cup this week. I would start him. He'll be on my team. Another guy who's also on my team, Michel at FC Dallas. He also played 90 minutes in midweek in U.S. Open Cup. Don't worry about him. Matt Hedges, a little bit more questionable. He did not start that game against the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. He did play 48 minutes as the substitute. With Walker Zimmerman having to leave that game, I would expect him to start in this one, especially with George Johns still a little bit up in the air. Another guy up in the air, Andrew Jacobson. He was cleared for last week against San Jose. Did not play, also did not play in that U.S. Open Cup match. This could be his return, but if you're buying him, probably not the time. Wait to see what happens as far as his field time goes. Then Dominic Oduro, he had that thigh contusion, said he could barely walk after that New York Red Bulls game. He is a game-time decision. If you're looking at starting him, make sure you have somebody on the bench who can come in. Perhaps Jairo Arrieta, his likely substitute.
All right, Andrew, let's get to some of the questions from the fans. This one's from Cameron. He wants some suggestions about which teams to avoid and then which teams to use as the bye weeks start rolling in this summer.
Well, remember, it's not just about bye weeks. This is an international period as well, so those breaks are really going to affect your teams. We'll start with teams to avoid. I think Sporting Kansas City, especially if you're looking to pick up guys like Graham Zusi or Matt Besler. Those guys are on international duty. They won't be around. Of course, that means there may be some backups you can pick up to replace. Another team to look at to avoid, probably LA. Their schedule so difficult. 2 road games at New England, at RSL, and then home to Portland, who have been very, very good this year. Teams to pick up. The Philadelphia Union, they may have a bye in round 16. That's as far as I'm looking ahead. But they don't have a lot of international call-ups, and Jack McInerney and Amobi Okugo have been 2 of the most impressive players in the game at bargain prices considering their production. A couple other teams to look at, Vancouver Whitecaps, no buys throughout this period, and then a double fixture in week 16. That's one certainly to check out. And then finally, Portland, if you don't have the internationals, guys like Rodney Wallace, Ryan Johnson, that's a team to look at as well. They certainly have produced. I think Khalif Al-Hassan might be a guy that you could snatch up from there.
Rodney Wallace has been one of the best players in the league this season, and that's translated to fantasy. Brian wants to know, though, with Rodney Wallace out with national team duty with Jamaica, what does he do with the Portland defense?
Well, the first thing to consider is that Rodney Wallace doesn't actually play defense for the Timbers right now. So if you're looking for a guy to pick up to replace him directly out of that back line, you probably need to stick with the guys that are already playing. He's going to be an attacker that comes in and spells him as he's with Costa Rica. Khalif Al-Hassan, I mentioned him just before. I think he's probably the man to do it. His playing time has been a little bit spattered. He's been getting quite a few minutes. I think now you'll start to see him replace that 90 that Rodney Wallace has been playing.
Next up, Curtis is worried about Chris Wondolowski. The Quakes have a big game coming up against RSL and then a bye. Is it time to give up on Wondo?
Well, it's probably time to give up on Wondo. I think the thing about Wondo is 10.1 is so much to spend for a striker, and there may only be 7 forwards with more points than him this year in fantasy, but you can better spend those dollars elsewhere. He is not the guy to pick up right now. You mentioned he has that bye. A guy to maybe replace him with Federico Higuain. No buys for the Columbus Crew over the next 3 weeks. I think he's probably primed for a little bit of a breakout.
George is curious about the Vancouver Whitecaps. They've got 2 big home games coming up, but Darren Maddox is away on national team duty. Is there anybody from the Caps they should pick up?
Here's the problem with the Whitecaps. They're frankly just unproductive in MLS Fantasy. Only one guy with more than 40 points this year. That's Young Pyo Lee. He is one of the few guys I would suggest picking up from this team for that double bye week. He will play 90 barring injury. He's played 90 in every game this season. Another couple guys to look at. Camilo Sanveso, he's been coming around. He's a guy that has potential, can certainly grab you some points. Not too expensive either. Then Nigel Reo-Coker, a consistent, if not spectacular presence in that midfield.
Well, some more questions about some prominent players in the fantasy game, starting with Mike McGee, who made his debut with the Chicago Fire earlier this week. I got to assume he's a starter right away for the Chicago Fire. What do the fantasy players do with him?
Yeah, he scored a goal in that game. I expect him to slot right into Frank Klopas' lineup. The problem with Mike McGee, though, is he seems to be overpriced based on that explosion at the beginning of the season. $8.8 million is an awful lot for a guy who hasn't scored more than 3 points since the beginning of April. That is probably not something you want to invest in right now. Wait and see what happens. I wouldn't guess that he's going to drop hugely. If he starts producing like he did at the beginning of the season, snatch him up. Until then, he's probably a guy to leave for others.
Out west, wondering about Chris Schuler, who may have lost his starting spot with Real Salt Lake. Does that mean the fantasy players have to drop him?
Yeah, it's time to drop Chris Schuler. It's not about him losing his starting spot. It's really about injury. He's got that broken hand. They held him out last week as a precaution, saying it was looking a bit bad. Also has a foot problem. Wait till he gets healthy. Plenty of options at 5.6. Drew Moore, Josh Williams, guys that you can pick up to replace him at this moment.
And last but certainly not least, one of the biggest storylines in MLS this season, the return of Robbie Rogers. Made his debut last week, came off the bench against the Seattle Sounders, and then played in the Open Cup midweek. What do fantasy players do with Robbie Rogers?
Yeah, he's 100% a wait and see for me. At $7.5 million, he definitely has potential, but you said it. He came off the bench these last 2 times. He's been out of the game for a while now. He simply is no guarantee to start for this LA Galaxy team. If he's playing 90 minutes, I've got faith that Robbie Rogers is going to create some chances. The problem with Robbie Rogers is I don't think he's going to score goals. He's not been a guy in this league that's consistently done that. That one season of 6 goals, his big breakout, but it hasn't been like that since. Definitely wait and see on Robbie Rogers. A lot of potential, but a lot of unknowns right now.
A lot of good questions and a lot of good answers from our resident fantasy expert, Andrew Wiebe. Make sure you log on, fantasy.mlssoccer.com, to get your lineup set before the weekend begins.